Hi, welcome. Let's get started. My name's Jesse Richards. I'm originally from New Jersey, but I've lived in New York for almost 20 years now. I'm a member of Big Apple Greeter, and what Big Apple Greeter is a non-profit organization that gives visitors to New York walks around the city that really convey the true spirit of the city and what it's like to live in New York with its real life neighborhoods and not just what you see on TV and in the movies. I'm excited to offer you this virtual tour. How it's going to work is we're going to use Google Street View to actually go on the streets of Manhattan and see what they look like from a regular person's view walking down the street. This is a map, as you can probably tell, of the five boroughs. And what I'll do now is switch to map view, and we can zoom in. And this is going to be our walk today. So this is in Lower Manhattan. We're going to be walking from Astor Place, down at the bottom here, up to Union Square, this area, up to Gramercy Park and the Gramercy neighborhood, and then over to Stuyvesant Square Park, which is still in the Gramercy neighborhood. So it's a small walk. In reality, if you were walking it, it would probably take you 45 minutes or an hour, depending on how quickly you were walking, or even less. We're going to spend about a half hour today going through and visiting these places. So let's start here. This is Astor Place. Astor Place's famous, sort of call to fame, recognizable landmark here is this cube. You can see it in the center. This is a piece of art by Tony Rosenthal. It's called Alamo. It's 8 feet long on each side. It actually spins if you push it with some might. Like a lot of pieces of art in the city, it was temporary until people lobbied to keep it in place, so it's been there ever since 1967. There was a 2013 fake documentary about someone who lived in the cube, but that was fake and no one actually lives inside there. If we spin around here, behind us we can see the Cooper Union, which is a school of art, architecture, and engineering, college established in 1859. It's famous for having historically free admission. The main building here has an auditorium in the basement that has hosted speakers such as Abraham Lincoln, actually almost all the presidents, Mark Twain, Frederick Douglass, Susan B. Anthony, and a lot more. If we go back to looking into the center of Astor Place, you can see these sort of mosaic poles and planters here. These are by an artist named Jim Power, a Vietnam veteran who's created a mosaic trail throughout the East Village. He's been working on it for over 25 years. He has a quote that I love that says, "My master plan is to draw the anxiety out of the city with beauty." If we back up here, walk up a little bit, make a right onto 8th Street, also known as St. Mark's Place, and we go to 8th Street and 3rd Avenue. We can see a sculpture here on the corner by Keith Haring. I have a background in art. I went to school for art, and Keith Haring is my favorite artist. He's a graffiti artist. He has a famous sort of radiant baby design, and he started with graffiti on the New York City subway and shot to superstardom in the art world in the 1980s. But he always believed his art should be free and available, and did many public works projects around the city, lots of social activism, and around the world as well. He died of AIDS in 1990 at the young age of 32. But he's an amazing artist, and you can see his art all around the city. Let's go back into Astor Place after a couple little detours there. This building in front of us, which has a Starbucks now on the ground floor, but is a nice looking building, is Clinton Hall. Underneath was the former site of the Mercantile Library of New York. The library was considered important enough that it had its own subway entrance, built in 1904 when the subway was built here. But now it's bricked up. You can actually see it. I have a picture here. If you go in the Astor Place subway station, you can see here that this sort of door is bricked up, but there's still a sign above it that says Clinton Hall. Before Clinton Hall sat there, there was the Astor Place Opera House, built in 1849. Now, there's three stories that, my three favorite stories that I want to share today. This is one of them. The Opera House that used to be here was the site of a violent riot that killed 25 people, after which they tore down the Opera House to build this Clinton Hall. But want to guess what the riot was about? It was between the supporters of two different Shakespeare actors over who was the better actor. So people will riot over a lot of things. Here we can see the entrance to the Astor Place subway station, which is a very beautiful structure here. And we can see more tile mosaics by Jim Power. Let's walk over here and make a right on Lafayette Street. We're going to walk north a block, and then we're going to make a left onto 9th Street. But this section of 9th Street is called Wanamaker Place because this building on the left used to be Wanamaker's, a famous department store. One of the first big department stores in the United States actually started in Philadelphia, but their biggest site became New York. But nowadays, this is actually the New York headquarters of Facebook. Obviously not their main headquarters, but their New York City-based headquarters. If we move over to Broadway, and I overshot it slightly here, so apologies. Here we go. We're now on 9th Street and Broadway. We can walk up here, make our way to this beautiful church, Grace Church. And what we can also do, let's just take a look at it here for a minute. Really nice. What we can also do is go inside it, also using Google Street View. So here's what it looks on the inside. You can see it's stunning. Several different layers of stained glass windows. Really beautiful, these plush pews. And that's Grace Church. Now let's keep going up here. We're walking north. This store on the right, Halloween Adventure, is a lot of fun. It's similar to a lot of, Halloween stores that pop up, but it's huge. It's there year-round, and it has lots and lots of mannequins with costumes on, just millions of costumes and different things all around, two-story store, and it cuts all the way through the block, so if you're ever being chased by someone and need to escape, you can run through there and secretly emerge on 4th Avenue. Coming up on 12th Street, we can see the Strand bookstore. This is a world-famous bookstore, and it's all that's left of Booksellers Row, which used to be right next to here along 4th Avenue. So 4th Avenue is down this street on the right. 4th Avenue is actually really interesting as a name because it's the same as Park Avenue. They're the same street. Originally the grid was laid out and you had 1st Avenue, 2nd Avenue, 3rd Avenue, 4th Avenue, 5th Avenue, 6th Avenue, and it made sense. But they renamed 4th Avenue to Park Avenue up at the north end of it, and it was the area where the railroad ran north from Grand Central. Then they had the great idea to sink the railroad underground and build a park above it. That street with the park in the middle became the beautiful Park Avenue that we know of. It's, of course, a prestigious address, and decades later, in 1959, residents of 4th Avenue below lobbied to change their street to the name Park Avenue South, and the city thought this would lend more prestigious address to 4th Avenue. So once that became Park Avenue South, there's only a tiny stretch of 4th Avenue that remains, which is right here between Astor Place and Union Square. If we go up a little bit more, again going north on Broadway, we can see, well, blocked by that van, we can see Forbidden Planet, which is a great comic book store. I'm a comic book fan. Very big store. You can get a lot of stuff. And then as we come up here to 13th Street, there's the movie theater, which actually has a garden on top, which not a lot of people know about, but you can see here if you look up. But what I want to look at is this beautiful building here. This is the Roosevelt Building. This is just one of my favorite buildings. It's just got this beautiful sort of orangey pink work, and along with tan and this beautiful green put together. It's just really nice. It was built in 1894, commissioned by a partnership of several members of the Roosevelt family. And there's another picture of it here we can see in even more detail. You can see it has these little friezes on the right and these little devil faces and all sorts of little faces in the architecture there. It's really amazing. There used to be a cozy here, and I've been on dates in that cozy, but that was many years ago now. We keep moving up. This whole time we're sort of walking north. We end up at Union Square. Speaking of the Roosevelts, and this is the second of the interesting stories that I want to share, this building on the corner next to the Roosevelt Building was also a Roosevelt building. It was the mansion of Cornelius Roosevelt, obviously not the same building that's there now. It was the mansion of Cornelius Roosevelt, and what's amazing is that in 1865, Abraham Lincoln's funeral procession proceeded through Union Square, right along here, and down Broadway. And watching it from one of the windows of Cornelius's mansion was a 7-year-old Teddy Roosevelt. So you don't really think about Teddy Roosevelt, from who we associate with the early 20th century, crossing lives with Abraham Lincoln, but at this moment they did, and a 7-year-old Teddy Roosevelt watched Lincoln's funeral procession. Union Square itself is a historic park named after the intersection of two main streets, Broadway and Bowery, which is now 4th Avenue and 3rd Avenue. A lot of people think it was named maybe for the Union in the Civil War, or named after unions as in labor unions, because there's been a lot of famous labor union protests and political rallies here. But no, it's just named after the union of two streets. It's a lively park with students and vendors and chess players and, like I said, a history of protests. Includes statues of George Washington, Abraham Lincoln, Lafayette, and Gandhi. And the Gandhi statue is one of my favorites. Looks like this. People always place garlands and flowers around his neck. And you can see the flowers here. And just really beautiful little park area dedicated to him and that statue. Let's walk along here in Union Square a little bit. If you want to see a better shot, here's a photo that someone took, a 360-degree photo of the square. You can see this double man walking, which is pretty funny. You can see a ghost pair of legs. Union Square has these sort of telltale subway entrances with this sort of pagoda look. Great views of the square from these stores and from Whole Foods. There's a farmer's market in Union Square every, Wednesday and Saturday. Really nice, with a lot of artists as well. The huge art piece here on the wall is called Metronome. It's by Kristen Jones and Andrew Ginzel from 1999. It's got this big electronic counter. A lot of people think it's the national debt because there's a similar national debt counter in Midtown somewhere, like by Penn Station or something. But it's not. It's just sort of a weird choice. It's milliseconds counting up and down to midnight. I don't know why it's there, but it's art, so it doesn't need a reason. And then the rest of it is all part of the same art piece with this golden tile, and actually that's supposed to be like a volcano, and smoke erupts from it every once in a while, which is disconcerting and inconsistent. If we walk back here, still continuing north, we get to the north end of Union Square Park. We can see Barnes & Noble's flagship store here. A really beautiful building, great view of the park from their third-story cafe. The building over here, in the center here, is the Decker Building. This is a beautiful landmark building, mix of Venetian and Islamic traditions, originally for the Decker Piano Company. It was also Andy Warhol's factory, like his famous club in the 1960s, as was this building under construction right now. To the right of it, Andy Warhol had two sites of the factory that were right next to each other here. And he was shot at one of them. And then if we look behind us on the right side of the street, this is the famous Tammany Hall. Tammany Hall was the Democratic political center that controlled New York politics for the city and the state for decades, for nearly 100 years until the 1940s. It helped a lot of immigrants, particularly the Irish, but it's now famous for its historical corruption scandals and just as a symbol of corruption and bribery. And they're restoring it right now and putting a like geodesic dome on top for some reason. But who knows? Maybe it'll look cool. You can see that these shots from Google Street View, which were taken years ago, or maybe about a year ago or so, must have been during Pride Week because there are a lot of rainbow decorations all around. So, if we go here, we're going to make a right. This is 17th Street. I'm just going to zoom along to the end of the block here. We get to the end of 17th Street, and where it hits Irving Place. Irving Place is essentially Lexington Avenue, but it is interrupted by Gramercy Park. So we're looking at Lexington for all intents and purposes. This really nice house on the right, marked as Washington Irving's home, the famous author of Sleepy Hollow and other things. But when you research it online, it says that Washington Irving didn't actually live there. So that's a shame. Don't trust every plaque that you read in the city. If we look down at the street a little bit, you can zoom in and just about see Irving Plaza, which is a famous musical venue there. For example, in 2015, Paul McCartney played there with a surprise show that he announced just that morning on Twitter. And it's had I've been in there many times, had a lot of famous musical acts. What's funny about this nice building that Washington Irving didn't live in is that the building to the left of it, which is no longer there, Oscar Wilde really did live there. So Washington Irving didn't live here, but Oscar Wilde lived there. And now we're going to turn around and head back north. So we're walking north now on Irving Place. Come up here to the corner. On the corner here is Pete's Tavern, and you can see it's called the Tavern O. Henry Made Famous. It's one of the oldest restaurants in New York, established, 1864. O. Henry was the author that wrote The Gift of the Magi and a lot of other famous short stories and books. And also in this restaurant was where Ludwig Bemelmans, which I'm probably mispronouncing, wrote his famous series of Madeline books, in an old house in Paris all covered in vines where 12 little girls in two straight lines. I have a young child, so I know those well. We walk back north here on Irving Place. A lot of nice little restaurants. Sort of shows you how different and how quickly New York neighborhoods change. We were just in bustling Union Square. 2 blocks away is this quiet residential street, Irving Place. And is this still the Union Square neighborhood, or is it the Gramercy neighborhood? The neighborhoods tend to overlap and have fuzzy boundaries in some cases. This is one of our favorite restaurants, my wife and I, a friend of a farmer cafe. It's where we told my parents that we were having a baby, so that's a lot of fun. 8 years ago. I'm going to keep walking north here until we get to the famous Gramercy Park. So this is Gramercy Park. It's one of only 2 private parks in New York. I think the other one is in Queens. Which means that only people who live around the park have a key. And there's beautiful buildings and homes around the park that are unfathomably expensive to live in. The park was built in 1833. The surrounding buildings have remained virtually unchanged for those 150 years. It's a very quiet and safe part of the city with only the very wealthy living there. Among the immediate neighborhood's residents have been, James Harper, who was mayor of New York and founded Harper Publishing. One of the Astors, just a very famous, wealthy family. Architect Stanford White, he designed the Washington Square Arch and one of the original Madison Square Gardens. He was actually murdered on the roof of Madison Square Garden. That's a whole long story that's very interesting that I recommend looking up. The Steinway family lived along here, famous for their pianos. Painters Robert Henry and George Bellows. Thomas Edison lived around the park. John Steinbeck, Chelsea Clinton, and lots of actors. John Barrymore, Ethel Barrymore, Julia Roberts, Uma Thurman, Jim Parsons, Jimmy Fallon, Winona Ryder, Gregory Peck, and lots more. Also over here is the National Arts Club and the Players Club. Let's take a quick look over here. Really nice buildings as well. The Players Club was a private social club founded by Edwin Booth in 1888. Some historians consider Booth the greatest American actor of the 19th century, but his younger brother is probably more well-known now, John Wilkes Booth, because he assassinated Abraham Lincoln. So that comes around to the Abraham Lincoln story. And one thing that we can do here that we definitely can't do in person while on a walk is look inside Gramercy Park, which is locked. So we see the statue of Edwin Booth here in the center of the park, and we can just look around and see some really nice trees, just a really nice quiet park. This park is open only once a year at Christmas. They let people come inside and hear caroling. I've done that. There's a line that wraps around the entire park to get in, and it's packed. But you get to see inside the park. So let's go back around this way. We're going to actually retrace our steps, go back to Irving Place here, walk down a block, look at this beautiful building on the corner. And I say beautiful because this is literally called Block Beautiful. This is 19th Street between Irving Place and 3rd Avenue. It's known for just the diversity of its stunning homes here. The row homes were remodeled in the early 20th century by architect Frederick Sterner. Some were former carriage houses. What's notable is that until that time, it wasn't common to remodel homes at all. You would just tear down a building and make a new one. But he popularized remodeling and redoing these houses. And you can see it was successful. They're very beautiful. This little circular window here is creepy because I happened to notice one day as I walked by that it has stuffed monkeys inside the window. So you can look in and see a little stuffed live, formerly live monkey looking at you. But to each their own. See just some of the really nice buildings here. Clearly former carriage houses. This really out of place, adorable one-story house in Manhattan. Lots of other stuff here. The colors of the houses are just really nice. Look at this one on the right. It's just really beautiful. And then near the end of the block, these little jockeys on the left. Near the end of the block here is a house known as the Giraffe House, because there are giraffes in tile above the doors. And I was trying to look up online and find out why there are giraffes there, and it turns out just that the owner likes giraffes. So again, monkeys, giraffes, whatever you like. When you can afford it, you can put them on your house and do whatever you like there. We're now on 3rd Avenue. We're going to make a right on 3rd Avenue. Head down a little bit. On the corner of 3rd and 18th is a little cafe called the Sunburst Cafe. And I only point it out because it's a cool cafe where my wife and I had our first date. Actually, we met online on eHarmony, and this is where we had our first date. I had a sun-dried tomato chicken sandwich. Sorry about a little diversion there. Walk down memory lane, as is this whole walk for me. We're going to zoom down 3rd Avenue. Sorry if it's a little dizzying. To 16th Street. And then make a left on 16th. And we're now on 16th between 3rd Avenue and Rutherford. There's a really nice church here. There's some buildings with some nice brick. Just a really nice, quiet area, leafy, beautiful. Although the playground equipment here is metal and has sharp edges. I don't know, it always kind of scared me when I walked past it. We continue walking here. This is a Quaker school, and there's a Quaker church as well. Several Quaker buildings here. The Quakers, also called the Friends, are a Christian denomination started in England in the 17th century. They're very active even still in social justice issues such as the abolition of slavery, anti-torture, things like that. In 1947, the Quakers, the whole organization, actually won the Nobel Peace Prize. And here we come close to the end of our walk here. We're in a weird zone between neighborhoods now. We're definitely not in Union Square. Some places still call this Gramercy, but we're not anywhere near Gramercy Park anymore. If we walk another 2 blocks, we'll end up at Stuyvesant Town, which is definitely a neighborhood. But right now, we're sort of in a mid-area, which happens in New York sometimes. But this is called Stuyvesant Square Park. It's a park cut in the middle by 2nd Avenue, so it has 2 halves of the park. This is actually the oldest cast iron fence in New York. It's very, very nice. You can see sort of a lively day in the park here with the fountain going on. And I'm going to cut to a picture inside the park where we can see a statue of Peter Stuyvesant. We can take a look around, facing the opposite way from where we were just facing. You can see these Quaker buildings, beautiful flowers in the center. We can see this couple having a very intense conversation. Don't know what that's about. And we can take a look here at Peter Stuyvesant. The park's named after him. He was the last Dutch Director General of New Amsterdam because, of course, Old New York was once New Amsterdam. Um, this was back around 1650. Um, he built the wall on Wall Street, his administration, and hugely expanded the city northward. Um, his statue here is from 1941 by Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, a famous sculptor and actually founder of the Whitney Museum. You can see him standing very proudly here with a cane. It's hard to tell, but he's missing a leg because the photo is sort of cut here, so it's a little hard to see. But his right leg is missing below the knee, and he has a peg leg, essentially. Um, I've seen this statue a million times because I've walked through the park to commute to work for many, many years now, even to different jobs, but I've always walked through this park. Here's the third of the three stories that are really interesting, and one of my favorite stories ever. What's weird here is that knowing this background on Peter Stuyvesant, seeing him every day, totally unrelated now, my wife and I decided to take a vacation to St. Martin before our daughter was born. This was 8 or 9 years ago. And St. Martin is a little Caribbean island. It's half Dutch and half French. They fought over the island quite a bit and then I guess had a tie and split it in half. We stayed on the Dutch side when we visited. And one day we went hiking way off the beaten path, probably in areas we shouldn't have been in. And we ended up at the top of a tall cliff with like these high grasses blowing in the wind. You could look down on the bay. It's this beautiful Caribbean bay, boats, just really, really nice. Just a stunning view. Surprisingly, a couple feet away at the top of this cliff, we see a pedestal with a sign on it. And on it was a little small plaque. And the plaque said, "This marks the spot where, by cannonball, Peter Stuyvesant lost his leg." And that's just one of the craziest coincidences I've ever had happen, that 2,000 miles away, we would find the spot where Peter Stuyvesant lost his leg. As you can imagine, a French ship shooting a cannonball directly at him, and him surviving in the 1700s, in the 1600s. It's just remarkable. So, good for you, Peter Stuyvesant. And that's the end of our walk here. I encourage you to visit Big Apple Greeter and find out more about the organization. Donate if you can to support our efforts to share New York with the entire world. Thank you so much.